Hello again, this is Fiendish with the Dimension Touring Company, bringing you episode 3 of the From the Ground Up video building series for Rift Dimensions. Tonight's episode is about landscaping, which you can see I've got about halfway done. I want to stop well in advance of the house, so that we actually have some clear spaces to work with for the house. Now if you've read my tips and tricks on the Dimension Touring Company blog, then you know I've talked about landscaping a lot because it's one of my areas that I really like to work with, between that and building structures. I like to do landscaping in layers with the foundation layer, which is nothing more here than these two shimmer sand taverns, and is pretty rare indeed to be able to do an entire foundation in 2 items. I also talk about the background layer. Now normally when I talk about backgrounds, I'm talking about trees, things like large crown saplings, ponderous gloamwoods, any kind of cheap tree that we usually get fairly good sized because they're bigger than bushes and they'll eat up more physical space in fewer items. I like to keep the smaller things up front to where you can actually pick them apart and where your visitors will actually be able to see them. Most Dimension visitors will not get back in your weeds and see, you know, how far back does this particular flower go. It just doesn't happen, you know, or who's going to come really back here to see if there's a hole up in the transformation back here. And how funny is that if I get stuck back here? There we go. Now also have what I call the forefront layer, which is where the small plants are. They're up front, where people can see them. And here, this is a break from my normal pattern because I'm using these high-low trees as my forefront. Now these are all pretty good sized trees that I've shrunk down a little bit. None of these are at the default size just because they're so large. The air sky adds a lot of dampening effect on these trees. They're normally very bright. They come in multiple colors. You got cornflower, orchid, violet, lavender, daffodil, everything from yellow to red to purple. In fact, let me go ahead and pull this air sky projector out right now, and you can see what this all would look like without the projector. Wow, this is pink. It's very pink, it's very bright. There's nothing out here to mute the light effects at all coming from the base dimension itself. Now there's a lot of this ambient light that comes from below where we're currently standing. I'm not quite sure where it comes from. Endless Eclipse in game was where the tier 1 raid was, where you fought Regulus at the end, and this whole dimension was from where that final boss fight. So you can see that here I've kind of changed up my pattern a little bit. My background layer are these evergreen shrubs. And there's a reason why. Let's go ahead and put the projector back down and sink it back into the dirt. The evergreen shrubs I'm using here as the background layer because they make a nice frame for all these brightly colored trees. The air sky really picks out the green shades of these evergreen shrubs and really helps it to contrast with all this other bright foliage. I'm using my trees, my big trees, my cherry trees, and my tentacled red vervain trees as background there to help separate this little folly from the rest of the dimension itself. In other words, they're more like ivy than an actual tree. They're going to help create an area of separation between this interior compound and whatever else is out there. So let's talk about this fountain, which I did mention in the last episode. We were going to go over how we make it. But first, a word about the terrace ponds. Terrace ponds will reflect the sky of the base dimension in most dimensions. There's a couple of exceptions to this. Fetid Plains, Puff Swamp, and Central Necropolis immediately spring to mind. Dimensions that do not get the dimensions-based sky reflected, they get a blue sky. and it actually makes for a very nice reflection on a terrace pond. But most ponds will reflect the sky of the base dimension. Now in some dimensions this looks a lot better than others. In Endless Eclipse it really doesn't look that good at all. As you can see, this water here is kind of gray, it's kind of dingy, kind of lifeless. I'm using the waterfall bases here to kind of break it up and add some texture and add a little bit of life and clarity to this water. And I also have it lit with, there's a violet light back here and a large cool light back here to kind of stack on it, in addition to the large violet light here. And I'm pretty sure there's more large violet lights. Ooh. Tucked all around this little fountain. Normally I don't like Dreamweaving lights on exterior builds because they don't put out enough lumens, as opposed to the physical lights that you can buy off the shop or off the auction house. But the large lights tend to be breaking that trend. Here's another one here. And that's where the bright colors of this fountain really come from, is a combination of the sky projector bringing out the natural colors of these corals and the violet lights that are shining on them, adding extra light. The statue that is the centerpiece of the fountain, that's the Blue Tier Loyalty statue, the large shrine for large icons. The urns here are alabaster amphorae, which come from the profession of fishing. I like those for fountains like this, and I'm using pouring water effects to make the actual fountain. In fact, let's come out here where it's clear and we'll look at some ponds. Here's a Ember Isle mineral pond. Now I don't care for this in this dimension because the water is always invisible, and I'm never sure when I use these if it's a bug or if it's my computer or what the deal is, but I can't ever see those because they have no reflection. That water is clear. And it's the same thing with the Ember Isle hot spring, which I have right here, because the minions have been bringing me back these things a lot. And it's the same thing with this one. Now one thing that you will notice with the hot spring is that there's a very faint steam trail coming off of the top of this water, but that doesn't really add to your ability to see the water. And if I stick it down here in my dirt, then I really can't see it, unless I'm looking at trying to look at my legs, and I'm seeing my legs are all wavy. So I don't use the Ember Isle ponds that often. I stick with the terrace ponds, and you can see this orange band of light here that's not up there. That orange band of light is part of the base dimension itself. And you can see how gray and water that lifeless that water is. Now when I shrink it some, that helps as it starts to pick up a reflection of the bottom of the pond. So let's talk about the corals. There's a brown shelf coral, and it was one of the things that I used to make that pond edge. I'm going to flip it upside down. And you see it's a nice blue color, which I actually really like that blue color. Now those shelf corals are from the Rift Shop. They're in a landscaping kit. The landscaping kit is 11 platinum, or it's 198 credits. When that might get fixed, I don't know. It's been that way for a while, but I will pay the 11 platinum. And here's the violet shelf coral. Now I actually like this one right side up, but for this build also turned it upside down, shrunk it, and then all the rest of the work on that fountain was done by hand. I didn't use the add-ons for that. To shrink, enlarge, reshape, and then mix in with the two worm cluster rocks. These are a New World drop. from Nightmare Tide Zones. And they're very pretty, very brilliantly colored rocks with some waving effects. And as far as the aquatic rocks go, I actually like these the best of all of them. Now to really start bringing out this light, or this pond, here comes the light. This adds a little bit of color to this water, adds a lot of color to these rocks. They start picking up textures and patterns and become much more interesting than they otherwise might be. And in addition to the large violet light, then you can stack a large cool light and it becomes very brightly illuminated. And depending on which sky projector you use, the effect of the lights on these corals and the effect of the water will also vary. So for this project, I've allotted about 500 or so pieces toward the overall landscaping. We're sitting at 280 right now, which is doing pretty good. Depending on how the main structure comes out, we may have a little bit more room to play around with as far as the landscaping goes. I'm estimating for interior decoration, we'll need upwards of 1,500 items. I'm trying to open as many rooms as possible, but it's not really going to hurt my feelings if we don't have to have a bathroom or kitchen. So, next episode, we will actually be starting on the structure itself. As you see here, I've swapped out my mausoleums for tiles, and we'll start talking a lot more about how to offset building blocks in the next episode. So that's it for episode 3, where we talk about landscaping and constructing things like fountains. And next time, we'll be starting on the structure itself. Have a good night.